Welcome to this deep dive. And today we're going to be talking about a concept that's both ancient and surprisingly relevant to how we live today, the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. And to help us on this journey, we're going to be using this booklet called The Four Noble Truths, which is filled with insights from Ajahn Sumedho, a monk who is steeped in the Theravada tradition. Think of it as our treasure map. There's some pretty profound ideas, and who knows, maybe we'll come out the other side with a little more wisdom about how to actually live our lives.
Well, what's interesting about these truths is that they're not meant to be like some rigid dogma, you know? It's
Yeah.
not about blind faith or anything like that. They're more like signposts pointing us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
Okay, so let's jump right in. So Ajahn Sumedho uses the Buddha's very first sermon after becoming enlightened, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sopiyata, as the basis for his own practice. But here's the funny thing, is that the Buddha's actual first attempt at teaching, before the Sutta, was kind of a flop. He went up to someone and basically said, hey, guess what? I'm enlightened now.
And the person was probably like, okay, like, what am I supposed to do with that? It's interesting because it just goes to show that our minds often have these blocks. You know, it's almost like having dust in our eyes that prevents us from seeing things clearly.
So the Four Noble Truths then are kind of like a more gentle approach,
Yeah.
inviting us to reflect and contemplate rather than just saying, like, believe this.
Hmm.
It's more about the journey of discovery
Yeah.
than like reaching a final destination.
Absolutely. And, you know, the first noble truth, straight from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, is birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, dissociation from the loved is suffering, not to get what one wants is suffering. In short, the five categories affected by clinging are suffering.
Yeah, pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
I mean, life definitely has its share of challenges, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just acknowledging that bad things happen sometimes.
Definitely. So the Pali word for suffering here is dukkha, and it's often translated as like incapable of satisfying or unable to bear or withstand anything. And it points to a kind of unease that can exist even when things on the surface seem pretty good. It's almost like an itch that you just can't quite scratch, you know?
So it's not just about experiencing pain or sadness in like a straightforward kind of way.
Right, exactly. Imagine gazing upon the Jungfrau and Eiger Mountains in the Swiss Alps, these majestic peaks piercing the sky. Even in such beauty, there's this kind of subtle dissatisfaction, this wanting for the experience to last forever, a fear of it fading. That's the essence of dukkha. Even beauty can become a source of unease when we cling to it.
That makes a lot of sense. So
Mm.
even if you're like living what seems like a perfect life from the outside, you can still experience this underlying sense of dukkha.
That's exactly the point Ajahn Sumedho is making. He uses this comparison of Queen Elizabeth and a tramp in Charing Cross. You know, outwardly their lives are worlds apart, but beneath the surface they both share this fundamental human experience of dukkha.
Yeah, and Ajahn Sumedho also talks about how it's important to kind of rephrase it, right? It's not I am suffering, but there is suffering.
Yes, and that subtle shift in perspective is really crucial because instead of getting caught up in self-pity, you can observe the suffering with a sense of detachment, almost like a scientist studying a specimen under a microscope.
So instead of asking, why me,
Hmm.
we can start to explore the nature of suffering itself. It becomes less about me and more about this like universal experience that we all share. But then the question is, how do we actually do that? How do we even begin to unravel this concept of suffering?
And that's where the second noble truth comes in, which gets to the root of the issue. And as the sutta states, it is craving which renews being and is accompanied by relish and lust, relishing this and that. In other words, craving for sensual desires, craving for being, craving for non-being.
Okay, so the second noble truth is saying that craving is the source of suffering.
In essence, yes. Tanha, the Pali word for craving, is like a powerful engine that keeps the cycle of suffering spinning. And Ajahn Sumedho breaks this craving down into three categories to help us understand its sneaky nature.
Okay, let's hear them.
So the first is kama tanha, the craving for sensory pleasures. This is probably the most obvious one, wanting that delicious piece of cake, getting lost in a catchy song, constantly seeking that next dopamine hit.
Yeah, I think we could all relate to that. What about the other two?
The second is bhavatanha, the craving for becoming. It's the desire to be someone or something else, to achieve a certain status or identity. This can manifest in the relentless pursuit of promotions at work, the need to be seen as successful, or even the desire to become enlightened.
So even striving for something positive can be a form of craving.
That's right. And the last one is vibhava tanha, the craving for non-being or annihilation. This might sound a little counterintuitive, but it's the desire to escape unpleasant experiences, to get rid of things we don't like, whether it's physical pain, difficult emotions, or even just the fear of death.
So basically, any form of pushing away or clinging to experience is a form of craving. It's pretty subtle when you think about it. But you said earlier that it's not desire itself that's the problem, but rather our attachment to it. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Imagine you have a beautiful antique clock, something you really cherish. You keep it polished, maybe you even worry about it getting damaged. Now, the clock itself isn't the problem, it's your attachment to it, the grasping and clinging that leads to suffering. What if you were able to appreciate its beauty without needing to possess it, without feeling that it might eventually break or decay?
That's a helpful image. So letting go doesn't mean we have to get rid of everything we enjoy in life. It's more about shifting our relationship to those things. But how do we actually do that? It's easy to say let go, but it's a lot harder to actually put it into practice.
That's where the third noble truth comes in, and it offers us a glimmer of hope. It points towards the possibility of ending this cycle of suffering.
So there's a way out. Tell me more.
The sutta describes it as, it is the remainderless fading and cessation of that same craving, the rejecting, relinquishing, leaving, and renouncing of it.
It kind of sounds like a fire burning itself out.
That's a great analogy. So the third noble truth refers to nirodha, the cessation of suffering. And it arises naturally when we stop feeding the flames of craving. It's not about forcefully suppressing or annihilating desire, but about understanding its impermanent nature. Like a fire without fuel, craving eventually dies out on its own.
So if we can learn to observe our cravings without getting caught in their grip, they'll naturally fade away on their own.
Yes, and this isn't just an intellectual understanding, it's an experiential realization that comes through practice. Ajahn Sumedho shares how, in his early days of meditation, he grappled with intense anger and hatred. At first, he resisted these emotions, but then he realized that allowing them to arise fully was the key to letting them go.
So it's about facing our suffering head on, rather than trying to avoid or suppress it.
You could think about it like this. Trying to suppress difficult emotions is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You might be able to keep it submerged for a little while, but eventually it's going to pop back up with even more force.
I like that image. So allowing these feelings to surface is the first step to freeing ourselves from their grip. But how do we even begin to approach this? It all sounds a bit daunting, to be honest.
And that brings us to the fourth noble truth, which offers a practical roadmap, a path to liberation from suffering. And as Asutta describes it, it is the Noble Eightfold Path, that is to say, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration.
So the Eightfold Path is like the key to putting these other truths into practice.
It is. You can think of it like a toolkit for cultivating a more awakened way of being. And it's not about becoming good in a kind of moralistic sense, but about developing qualities that lead to greater wisdom, compassion, and ultimately freedom from suffering.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into this toolkit, but where do we even begin with 8 different elements?
Well, the Eightfold Path is often grouped into 3 sections: wisdom, morality, and concentration. And each section supports and reinforces the others, like interwoven threads in a tapestry.
Okay, that's a helpful way to visualize it. So let's start with wisdom. What are the elements within that section?
The first 2 elements of the path are right understanding and right intention. Right understanding, or samadhi in Pali, is the foundation upon which everything else rests.
So it's about seeing the world clearly, without the distortions of our biases and preconceived notions.
It is. It involves understanding the Four Noble Truths, not just intellectually, but on a deep, intuitive level. Ajahn Sumedho calls it gut knowledge, something that permeates our entire being, not just our thoughts.
So it's not just about reading a book or listening to this deep dive. It's about embodying these truths in our lives.
Right, and this deep understanding leads to right intention, or sammasankappa.
And what does right intention involve?
It's often translated as right aspiration, and it's about aligning our actions and motivations with wisdom and compassion, with the understanding that true happiness comes from letting go, not grasping.
So it's about setting intentions that are rooted in this deeper understanding of reality, rather than being driven by our usual desires and cravings.
That's the key distinction, and Ajahn Sumedho is careful to differentiate right aspiration from tanha, the craving we talked about earlier. It's not about wanting to become enlightened or achieve some special state, but about acting in a way that's conducive to liberation, both for ourselves and others.
So right understanding and right intention are like the compass and the map, guiding us towards a more awakened way of being.
A wonderful analogy. They provide the foundation for the rest of the Eightfold Path.
This is fascinating. So where do we go from here? What's next on this journey?
From this foundation of right understanding and right intention, we then move into the realm of morality, or sila in Pali. And it's about bringing our actions into alignment with this newfound wisdom.
Okay, so morality isn't about following some like external set of rules in Buddhism.
Not really, no. It's more about cultivating a way of being that naturally flows from our understanding of the Four Noble Truths. It's about living ethically and skillfully, not out of a sense of obligation, but because it's the most natural expression of our awakened heart, you know.
So the Eightfold Path outlines three specific aspects of morality: right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So let's unpack those a bit further. What does right speech actually look like in practice?
Well, right speech, or samavaka, involves speaking truthfully, kindly, and thoughtfully. It's about using our words to uplift and inspire, to create harmony and understanding.
I think we've all been in situations where we've seen the fallout from like
Yeah.
careless words,
hmm
whether it's a hurtful comment that creates conflict or even just gossiping that spreads negativity and all that.
And Ajahn Sumedho suggests that we pay close attention to the intention behind our words. Are we speaking from a place of genuine kindness and compassion? Or are we motivated by anger, jealousy, or the need to manipulate, you know? Because even subtle shades of ill will can have a ripple effect, disturbing the peace within ourselves and in our relationships.
So it's not just about avoiding outright lies or like harsh speech. It's about cultivating a deeper awareness of the impact our words have,
Yeah.
even like the seemingly insignificant ones.
That's right. And this awareness then extends to right action, or samakamanta, which involves acting ethically and with integrity.
So what kinds of actions are we talking about here?
Well, it goes beyond just the obvious physical actions like abstaining from killing, stealing, or harming others. It also encompasses our mental actions, cultivating thoughts of loving kindness and compassion, while at the same time letting go of thoughts that are rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion.
It's interesting how right action includes both our physical and mental activities, like cultivating a sense of wholesomeness that like permeates every aspect of our being, you know?
Yes, and this sense of wholesomeness also extends to our livelihood as well. The Eightfold Path includes right livelihood, or sama ajiva, which is about earning a living in a way that doesn't cause harm.
Okay, so we should be mindful of how our work impacts the world.
Think about it this way. If your work is causing harm to others or the environment, even in a subtle way, it's going to create a dissonance within you. And that dissonance is a form of dukkha. So, right livelihood is about finding alignment between our values and how we make a living. Ajahn Sumedho encourages us to ask ourselves, are we driven by greed, ambition, or the desire to exploit others? Or are we actually contributing something positive to the world?
It's a powerful reflection to think about, especially in today's world where there's so much emphasis on material success and all of that. So morality in Buddhism isn't about following like a rigid set of rules. It's about cultivating a way of being that's rooted in wisdom and compassion. And that extends to our speech, our actions, and even how we make a living.
That's a beautiful summation. It's about weaving ethical conduct into the very fabric of our lives.
Okay, so we've explored wisdom and morality. What about the third section of the Eightfold Path? Concentration. I have to admit that sounds a little intimidating.
Concentration, or samadhi in Pali, is often misunderstood. It's not about becoming some emotionless monk sitting in a cave, you know? It's about developing a quality of mind that is clear, focused, and stable. Think of it like training a muscle. Just as physical exercise strengthens our bodies, practicing concentration strengthens our minds.
Okay, so it's like mental fitness. I like that.
Right.
So what are the specific elements of concentration within the Eightfold Path then?
Well, the first is right effort, or samavayama, and this refers to the energy and determination that we bring to our practice. It's about cultivating wholesome qualities like generosity, patience, and loving kindness, and gently letting go of unwholesome qualities like greed, hatred, and delusion.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to be good.
Not at all. Ajahn Sumedho reminds us that right effort should be guided by kindness and compassion, both towards ourselves and others. It's about gently nudging ourselves in the right direction. Kind of like training a puppy with patience and positive reinforcement rather than punishment.
That's a really helpful analogy. Okay, so how does right mindfulness fit into all of this?
Right. Mindfulness, or samasati, is really at the heart of Buddhist practice. It's about developing a quality of present moment awareness. Instead of getting lost in thoughts about the past or worries about the future, we learn to pay attention to our direct experience, our thoughts, feelings, sensations as they arise and pass away.
So it's about being present in the here and now.
It is. Ajahn Sumedho describes mindfulness as whole-mindedness. It's about embracing the totality of our experience without judgment or aversion. We don't try to block out unpleasant experiences or cling to pleasant ones. We simply observe them with a sense of curiosity and acceptance.
It's almost like watching clouds drift across the sky. You don't try to control them or make them go away. You just observe them with a sense of wonder.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And finally, we come to right concentration, or samadhi. And this is the ability to focus our attention and cultivate a state of mental clarity and stability. And it's not about forcing our minds to be still, but about cultivating a natural and effortless focus.
So how do we actually cultivate this kind of concentration?
Ajahn Sumedho often uses the analogy of a still pond. When the surface of the water is calm and undisturbed, we can see clearly to the bottom. But when the water is agitated, our vision becomes cloudy and distorted. Similarly, when our minds are calm and collected, we're able to see things more clearly and make wiser choices.
So meditation plays an important role in developing right concentration.
Meditation is a powerful tool for training the mind. But it's not the only way to cultivate right concentration. We can practice bringing mindfulness to everyday activities like walking, eating, or even just washing the dishes. The key is to cultivate a quality of attention that is focused, present, and undisturbed by distractions.
So the three elements of concentration, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, all work together to create this foundation of mental clarity and stability that supports us on the path to liberation.
They do, but it's important to remember that the Eightfold Path isn't a linear process. It's not like checking boxes off a to-do list.
So we don't have to master one element before moving on to the next.
Not at all. Ajahn Sumedho emphasizes that all 8 elements are interconnected, supporting and reinforcing each other. It's like a beautiful tapestry where each thread contributes to the overall beauty and strength of the fabric.
That's a helpful image. So cultivating wisdom, morality, and concentration are all part of this interconnected journey.
They are. And this journey, when approached with sincerity and diligence, leads us towards the cessation of suffering, the experience of nibbana, which is the ultimate aim of the Buddhist path.
And we talked a bit about nibbana earlier, but I'm so curious about what it actually means. Is it like some kind of blissful state that we achieve after death? Is it kind of like heaven?
That's a common misconception. But nibbana isn't a place that we go to after we die. It's a state of being that's accessible right here and now.
So we don't have to wait until we die to experience liberation.
The Buddha emphasized that these truths are to be realized in this very life. It's about awakening to the way things are, not about becoming something we're not.
Okay, that's both encouraging and a little bit daunting. So if nibbana isn't a place, then what is it? How would you describe it?
Well, nibbana is often translated as extinction or blowing out, but those words can be a bit misleading. It's not about annihilation or anything like that. It's more about extinguishing the flames of greed, hatred, and delusion that cause us so much suffering. It's about waking up from this dream of separation and realizing our true nature.
So it's about letting go of the illusion of a separate self.
It is. And in that letting go, we discover a profound sense of peace, freedom, and interconnectedness. Imagine a wave realizing that it's actually part of the ocean. There's no longer this sense of struggle, of trying to be something separate. There's just this vast expanse of being.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So nibbana isn't about escaping from the world or like transcending our human experience or anything. It's about seeing through the illusion of separateness and realizing our interconnectedness with all things.
That's a wonderful insight. And this realization doesn't come from just intellectual understanding alone. It's a direct experience that arises through the practice of the Eightfold Path.
So the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path aren't just abstract teachings. They're a practical roadmap to awakening, a guide to living a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
They are. They invite us to cultivate wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, to embrace the totality of our experience with courage and acceptance.
This has been incredibly insightful, but I have to admit, I'm still kind of wrestling with this idea of letting go. It feels scary to me, like I might lose myself in the process. What would you say to someone who's struggling with that fear?
Well, it's completely natural to feel that way. We've spent our entire lives building up this sense of who we are, this ego identity that we cling to for security and a sense of belonging.
Yeah, it's like we're afraid that if we let go of our ego, there'll be nothing left. Just this big, empty void.
Ajahn Sumedho addresses this fear directly in the book. He reminds us that letting go isn't about annihilation. It's about realizing our true nature, which is beyond the limitations of this ego. It's like a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. The caterpillar doesn't cease to exist. It simply takes on a new, more expansive form.
That's a comforting thought.
Hmm.
So letting go is less about losing ourselves and more about discovering a more authentic and expansive way of being.
Imagine stepping out of a small, cramped room into a vast open sky. That's what letting go can feel like. We're not disappearing, we're actually expanding into something much greater than we ever imagined possible.
Wow, that's a really powerful image. So the path to Nibbana is a process of unraveling these limiting beliefs and stories we've created about ourselves, and in the process discovering the boundless freedom that lies beneath all of that.
It is. And this process isn't always easy or comfortable. There will be challenges and setbacks along the way.
So what advice would you give to someone who's just beginning this journey? Where do we even start?
The beauty is, the beauty of the Buddhist path is that it's accessible to everyone. It doesn't matter what your background is or what you believe. There's no need for grand gestures or dramatic life changes. Ajahn Sumedho often says that the most profound transformations happen in the smallest of moments.
So it's not about becoming a monk or living in a monastery.
Not unless that truly calls to you. The essence of the Eightfold Path is about cultivating awareness in every aspect of our lives. How we speak, how we act, how we work, even how we eat and breathe.
So it's about bringing mindfulness to the mundane, those everyday moments that we often just take for granted.
It's like, think of it like this. Each moment is an opportunity to practice. So when you're brushing your teeth, really pay attention to the sensations. When you're walking, notice the movement of your body, the feeling of your feet on the ground. When you're eating, savor the taste of each bite.
It's about waking up to the richness of our experience,
Yeah.
even in the simplest of activities.
Exactly. And as we cultivate this awareness, we begin to notice the subtle ways in which craving and aversion show up in our lives. We might notice the urge to reach for our phone when we're feeling bored, or the tightness in our chest when someone cuts us off in traffic.
So it's about becoming more aware of our habitual patterns, those automatic reactions that often just lead to more suffering.
Yeah, and as we become more aware of these patterns, we actually have a choice. We can continue to react in the same old ways, or we can pause, take a breath, and respond with greater skill and compassion. It's like creating a little bit of space between the stimulus and our reaction, and that allows us to make a more conscious choice.
So mindfulness is like hitting the pause button on autopilot.
What a great way to put it. And in that pause, we can tap into the wisdom and compassion that are already within us. We can ask ourselves, okay, what's the most skillful way to respond in this moment? What will lead to greater peace and well-being, both for myself and others?
That actually reminds me of something we talked about earlier. You know how Ajahn Sumedho says that the Eightfold Path isn't a linear process. We don't have to master one element before moving on to the next one.
Right, all 8 elements work together. They support and reinforce each other. It's like a spiral staircase. We might revisit certain elements multiple times, but each time we do, we come back with a deeper understanding. It's a lifelong journey of learning and growth.
So there's no pressure to achieve some perfect state of enlightenment.
The Buddha himself taught that even enlightened beings continue to learn and grow. The path is the goal, the joy is in the journey.
That's a very liberating thought. It kind of takes the pressure off, right? It allows us to embrace the process with a sense of playfulness and curiosity.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been so insightful. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive into the Four Noble Truths, what would you say are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the Four Noble Truths offer a really profound framework for understanding the nature of suffering and the path to liberation from suffering. They invite us to look deeply into our own experience, to cultivate awareness of the ways in which craving and aversion create suffering in our lives.
And the Eightfold Path gives us this practical roadmap for transforming our relationship to suffering. It's about cultivating a way of being that is rooted in wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness.
It's a journey that requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to embrace our human experience fully, both the joys and the sorrows. But ultimately, it's a journey that leads to greater peace, freedom, and fulfillment.
Well, thank you again for guiding us through this exploration of the Four Noble Truths. It's been such an illuminating and inspiring conversation.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, to find what resonates with you, and to just experiment with bringing these teachings into your own lives. You might be surprised by the transformative power of simply paying attention, of waking up to the richness of this present moment.
And perhaps in the process, you'll discover that the peace and freedom you've been seeking have been within you all along.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll join us again next time for another exploration into the world of ideas,